Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy. I'm your host this evening. The goal in each show is to inform, highlight, and educate you about the issues, challenges, and pitfalls you may face in both the living probate and the probate of a decedent's estate. A living probate involves a court-appointed conservator and guardian who are charged with handling the finances and care of an aging adult. On the other hand, the probate of a decedent's estate involves a court-appointed executor or administrator who are charged with probating the estate of a deceased loved one. When someone passes away, probate of estate is the process to transfer the title or ownership of probate assets to the beneficiaries of the decedent. Not all assets are probate assets, and there are different types of probate, some simple, others more complicated. Like a journey on a slow-moving steam engine train, probate of an estate has a beginning, several stops along the way, and at the end of the trip, the balance of the probate assets remaining are delivered to the decedent's beneficiaries. Some probate train rides are short, while other probates seem to never end. Our program today introduces you to the Stafford County Commissioner of Accounts, who oversees the probate of Stafford County estates. The Commissioner has oversight and must approve many of your decisions in probate, from what you propose to pay or have already paid to what you distribute to each beneficiary of the estate being probated. This program will identify steps to take, pitfalls to avoid, and so you receive the necessary Commissioner's approval to continue on your probate journey. Our guest today is the Stafford County Commissioner of Accounts, who was appointed by the Stafford County Circuit Court on November 1st, 2009, to oversee all estates being probated in Stafford County. In addition to her appointment as Commissioner of Accounts, she continues to maintain a private law practice that focuses on general civil litigation and estate planning with the law firm of Glover and Donk. She served as the 2003-2004 President of the Virginia State Bar, as a member of the Virginia State Bar's 6th District Disciplinary Committee, and is a continuing member of the Virginia Continuing Legal Education Committee as well. In 2014, she was also appointed by the Spotsylvania Circuit Court as their Assistant Commissioner of Accounts to help out in certain cases. Please welcome Stafford County Commissioner of Accounts, Jeannie Donk. Jeannie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's my pleasure. Well, Commissioner of Accounts is a big job.
It is.
So let's talk a little bit about, though, the probate process. You know, probate process in Virginia is very unique. Can you kind of tell our listeners a little bit about what we mean by that?
Sure. So Virginia is the only state in the Union that has a Commissioner of Accounts system. Mm-hmm. I could spend probably more time than we have bringing us from 1849 to the present, but when the Virginia Code or the Virginia laws were rewritten in 1849, prior to that time, you could appoint the executor of an estate, could appoint a friend, a sibling, to be the commissioner to oversee the auditing or the distribution of an estate's assets and the payment of its debts. Mm-hmm. As you might imagine, that invited a fair amount of litigation, or as my friends call it, shenanigans. So in 1849, Virginia instituted a system where the circuit court delegates to a licensed Virginia lawyer the work of overseeing all the fiduciary's requirements, statutory law, legal requirements, excuse me. So we're an arm of the court. We are delegated with the duty to oversee generally all fiduciaries' actions and to make sure that things are done the way they're supposed to be done pursuant to law and to prevent fraud, in essence.
Okay. So we sort of move into the sort of the discussion about the duties and responsibilities of the Commissioner of Accounts. So tell us a little bit about those duties and responsibilities beyond what you just mentioned, and a little bit about the caseload you're facing in your office down in Stafford County.
Under what is now 64.2, 1200 et sec, in that general vicinity of the Virginia Code, sets out the duties and obligations of fiduciaries, but it also sets out the duties and requirements of the Commissioner of Accounts. So when someone qualifies as a fiduciary, either on a decedent's estate, someone has died and left a will that appoints this particular individual to oversee the distribution of their assets and the payment of their debts, or if someone is alive and is having trouble taking care of their personal affairs, and they become the conservator, or they become the executor, they become the administrator, they become a fiduciary. And so as a fiduciary, they are required to report to someone about their activities because they're handling somebody else's stuff. It's not generally or not all of it is their stuff for the most part. So what the law requires is that you qualify before the circuit court clerk, and then thereafter you report to the commissioner. So they are required to make certain filings with the commissioner that I review, I audit to make sure that they're compliant with the legal requirements, gather all the assets, pay the debts, that kind of thing. Make sure that the beneficiaries or the heirs get whatever is supposed to be coming to them.
That seems like a big task.
Can be.
So how many folks do you have to support your efforts? I'm sure you don't do all this work yourself.
Well, Stafford County, which is about 42 miles to the south of Fairfax, has approximately 140,000 residents. We, on average, handle 800 to 1,000 filings a year.
Wow.
So there's myself. I do a lot of it, and then I have 2 office assistants who help me with all of that.
Great. Now, for people who want to reach you, what's the best way people to reach you? Is it by mail or telephone, or if they want to ask questions and stuff like that?
Probably the fastest way is to call the office. The next fastest way, or to stop in. We are still a jurisdiction where you can stop in.
Isn't that nice?
Yes. Or call. That's probably more convenient for most people. You are welcome to fax. You're welcome to send me a letter. And that's how we handle, people who need communication with our office.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about someone gets qualified and goes down and sees that the great probate office people down there in Stafford County. Yes. They do a fabulous job. Whether they have a will or don't have a will, talk about some of the very first steps that people need to do in order to get themselves set up correctly so that they can report things to you in a way that will work and get approved by your office.
Do you want me to talk about what the fiduciary should do or what I do when I receive?
I would like to talk what you would tell people they should do. In other words, things that they need to make sure they do so they can actually do the things you're going to ask them to do.
Yep. Make sure they're required to do by law.
Sure.
So what someone should do if they find themselves as a fiduciary is to gather together all of the assets of either the estate, or if it's a living person, the ward is what they're called. Gather together all of those things. They need to open up an estate account or a conservatorship account. Do not use your personal account if you're the fiduciary, and do not use the decedent's bank account or the ward's bank account. You're required to set up a separate, distinct account. That will help keep things organized and keep confusion out of the system. So gather together all the assets, open up a bank account, determine what debts or bills need to be paid. So if you have a living person, a ward, there might be mortgages that need to be paid, or health insurance bills that need to be paid. You as a fiduciary might need to deposit things into the conservatorship or the estate account. If it's a conservatorship and they get a retirement check, a checky check, a paper check that actually comes in the mail as opposed to direct deposit, you need to deposit that into the conservatorship account. So you need to, as the fiduciary, it's your duty in essence to draw a circle around what the assets are, what the debts are, and make sure you have all of that in hand. So that would be the first thing. Well, actually, let me amend that. The first thing probably somebody who qualifies as a fiduciary should do is read the instructions, the Virginia Supreme Court instructions. And those instructions are really good. They're very straightforward. Since this system, anybody can become a fiduciary in essence. There are certain requirements that clerk of court may require of a potential fiduciary, but it's set up so that you don't have to be a lawyer or CPA or schooled in these ways. 3/4 of all of the fiduciaries in my office are lay people. They will probably do this job once. So the system is really set up to be user-friendly, and the first step on getting that friendliness quotient in is to read the instructions by the Virginia Supreme Court. They really clearly explain what it is a particular fiduciary's job is. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is set up the bank, gather all the assets and debts, and the third thing would be open up a bank account dedicated just to that function.
Okay, and typically with the estates, of course, they need to go out and get their tax ID number in order to open up that bank account. Now, I know we talked about this in preparation for this show. You then also shortly after they qualify, you get notified about that. You write them a special letter.
I do.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So once a fiduciary qualifies in the Stafford Circuit Court, the probate clerk will send me the qualification papers. So when I receive those, which is pretty shortly after they after they qualify, the clerk isn't required to get it to me at any particular time, but the clerk's really efficient, and it's usually that day or within a couple of days. Say if they qualify on a Friday, I probably won't get it till Monday. But the moment I have that, I send what we call in my office the handshake letter. And the handshake letter is 3 or 4 pages long, and it reiterates what the clerk has said to the fiduciary when they were qualifying. We are really blessed in our community with a probate clerk who takes time with all the qualifying individuals, really walks them through the process. I think most of the clerks in the Commonwealth will hand the qualifying individual the inventory, the first document they need to prepare and file with the instructions. I think they hand them at least one set of first accounting documents with the instructions. Our clerk really takes time and walks the person through. So when they get my letter, it's a reinforcement or a reiteration of all of the things that the clerk has already said to them. Just puts it down on paper. And one of the things that I do is notify that individual about when their first filing is due. I make it all in capitals and bold, and I think I underline that, because there are all of a sudden 1,000 details.
Right.
The system is not difficult, it's just new for most people. But
Sure.
if they take a few moments and they read the instructions, they've already been through the clerk's direction, and they look at the letter, most of the questions probably that they might have had hopefully have been answered.
Well, I got to reiterate that Carmen, the probate clerk, is fabulous.
Yeah.
And she does an excellent job.
Yes, Ms. Rivera. She's
she
very
does
good.
an awesome job and almost gives a tutorial
Yep.
to people who go through that process. Let's turn to the very first set of filings that sort of come up really pretty quickly
I do.
when a person takes over as the administrator or executor of the estate. One of your roles, as you mentioned, is to oversee and audit and improve inventories and accounting. So in the case of the inventory, what are you looking for in that? What is that filing trying to capture?
So the inventory is the first filing with the Commissioner of Accounts office after a fiduciary qualifies with the clerk. And the inventory is pretty straightforward. It is not by design a difficult document. It is simply the listing of the assets of the individual's estate. So there are 5 parts to it. You can fill it out online. If you can get to the Virginia Supreme Court website, which is very easy to get to, and you look up a decedent's inventory, if that's what you're fiduciary for, you can pull it up. It's PDF, so you can type on the screen. You still have to print it out because we have to have original signatures and dates. But the first part is personal property. And personal property essentially is anything other than dirt. I know my law school professors are wincing right now that I just reduced it to that. But essentially it's clothing, jewelry, silver, china, furniture. Now, the question I get asked a lot is, do we have to itemize all of that? My answer in Stafford, and I can't answer for any other commissioner, is no. You can put personal property, parens, clothing, furniture, jewelry, clothes parens, and an amount. If it's regular, everyday stuff. If you own the Hope Diamond, if you have Revere Silver, if you own a whole bunch of Ferraris, those things need to be listed individually because those are unique and valuable.
Sure.
But bank accounts, retirement accounts, if they're not payable to somebody else, if they're payable to the estate or they don't have a death beneficiary, cars, boats, trains, airplanes, that kind of personal property. The second section is the one that probably is the second most question I get asked, which is the part 2 on the inventory is POD accounts, payable on death, or survivorship accounts. You have to list those accounts, but they don't come through the estate. They become the property of the individual who is to be paid the account on death or is the survivor. But they need to be listed on there so everyone knows they're being, in essence, accounted for. Third is real estate that you, the fiduciary, have control over under a will. The fourth is real estate in Virginia that you don't have control over as the fiduciary. And the fifth part is real estate outside of Virginia. So it's pretty straightforward. You can fill it out with a pencil. You could fill it out with a crayon if you wanted to.
Sure.
On the last page of the inventory, though, an important box, about 3/4 of the way. It's a big box. And it basically says that you've done everything you were supposed to do. You've given anybody notice who was supposed to have this, and you sign and date it and put your address. The one thing I've learned is that people move a lot. So between the time somebody qualifies as a fiduciary and when they have to file an inventory, sometimes they've moved and they haven't updated their address, and that's important for my office.
That can be a problem.
Yeah.
Well, I know the next thing is they would file an accounting after 12 months has passed, but and that's a much more detailed document, which requires a lot more support documents to support those numbers. Tell me, what are the most common reasons that accountings, when they're submitted, are not approved by your office?
Probably the easiest one is math. The first page of the accounting is a summary sheet. The top third of it is the decedent's estate and who the fiduciary is and the dates that they're accounting from and to. And then the balance of it are all the summary numbers. And all those numbers have to add up. They've got to balance, because in essence this is a balance sheet.
Sure.
And so people will not get those numbers right. They won't add them up correctly, because, yep, we add them up when they come in the office. They're required to put an itemized sheet behind that, or sheets. So the numbers on the first page are totals of what's going on in the estate. So there's an itemized listing behind that. So if the total receipts is $1,000, then there's going to be an itemized sheet that shows what that $1,000 is. It might be one deposit of $1,000, or it might be 10 deposits of $100, but that's the itemized sheet. Then behind that is the supporting documentation that verifies all of that. So if the fiduciary has paid a bill, then that bill, a copy of that bill needs to be included in that accounting, and a copy of the check that paid that bill. Because I need to make sure that that was a bill of the estate, a proper bill of the estate. So the second reason why accountings aren't approved by my office is there's not complete documentation. The bank accounts statements would be important, and sometimes people don't send them in, or oddly enough, sometimes people don't send all of them in. So we have to ask for those.
Sure. Okay. Well, those are good things to know. Well, we're accounting for the assets. The next category that we run into, of course, is creditors have an interest in this process as well, because they may be owed money by the decedent. So, and you do oversee all the disbursements. But if disputes arise, over whether something should be paid or not, how do you protect creditors and make sure they get paid?
Pursuant to Virginia law, creditors can make a claim on an estate. There's a specific way they have to do it. It's not particularly difficult, and the creditors, oddly enough, know how to do it pretty perfectly. So when we get notice of a claim, we send a copy of that to the fiduciary. They are required to address that claim. And if the fiduciary believes that it's a proper claim of the estate, say it's a credit card bill from the decedent, then they can pay it. If they dispute it, they can request a debts and demands hearing, which is a hearing before the Commissioner of Accounts, where the fiduciary will bring their proof that the claim, the debt is not applicable to the estate or not payable by the estate, and the creditor can show up and provide their proof that it is. And I will have a hearing and swear witnesses and take evidence and then make a decision.
Okay, good. And one thing we do want to caution folks, that they can't have estates that might have more debts that actually are bona fide debts versus the assets, what we call the insolvent estate. Any advice for folks, to executors, about what they should do in your community and before you if they have what they think might be an insolvent estate?
As a fiduciary, you're not required to get help. You're not required to hire a lawyer or an accountant. You can do it all on your own. But if I had qualified on an estate that I determined was insolvent, and I'll say, at least in my office, 9 out of 10 fiduciaries don't know going in that it's insolvent. They only figure that out once they kind of get in there and get a hold of everything. But the moment I determined it, if I were the fiduciary, that it was an insolvent estate, I'd get help. I would call a lawyer who does that kind of work or an accountant who does that kind of work, because it can be tricky. And if you, the fiduciary, pay something you shouldn't, or it's not in a it's not pursuant to statute, because there are tiers, TIER, about how things are to be paid, you could be personally liable, and that's not what you became the fiduciary for. So, and an insolvent estate doesn't, as a matter of fact, I've only seen a couple of states where essentially there was zero cash. Most of these states had cash, but less cash than they had debts. So when a fiduciary, and this is probably another question I get a lot, when a fiduciary needs assistance, if it is related to the business of the estate pays for it. So if there's cash in the estate, even if it's insolvent, the fiduciary can hire professional assistants to assist them to account for the estate properly. And it might do it more efficiently, so it might actually save money for the estate.
Sure. Well, and I know you referenced the fact there is a statute that actually sets forth what gets paid and what gets paid first.
Yes.
And administration expenses, like you talk about, are one of those expenses. The other one where people run into trouble, as you mentioned, is they pay the funeral bill out of their pocket or out of the estate and pay too much, and then when it gets to your office, well, I know Gordon Payton used to talk about this, but it broke his heart when he had to tell someone they had to give back some money that they paid for the funeral because of an insolvent estate. So getting professional advice is really, really helpful in this situation. Let's talk about the folks who really this is all about, and that's the beneficiaries. What are some suggestions you have for executors who are dealing with beneficiaries? Should they communicate them all the time? Do they need to get them to sign stuff when they give them distributions? Talk a little bit about how those two parties work, the executor and the beneficiary.
So we get a fair number of calls from beneficiaries or heirs of estates. I'm just wondering what's going on.
Sure.
So if I could say anything to a fiduciary, and what I would say to beneficiaries or heirs, communication is king, or maybe I should say communication is queen. And maybe this just comes from being a trial lawyer for such a long time. But when you can give information, give it. Absolutely. The reason why we have the process we have, and the reason why people have to account, is to prevent fraud, is so that people don't say, hey, I didn't get something I was due. So we have a fairly transparent process. It's not open to the public. It's open to only those individuals who have an interest in the estate, which you can understand the reasons for that.
Sure.
So if you're a fiduciary, regardless of how well everybody got along while the decedent was alive, once someone has died and you're going to be the fiduciary, you've become the fiduciary, contact everyone who is a beneficiary or an heir. Send them, without them asking, a copy of the will. That way, everybody has the roadmap of what's happening.
Sure.
If there's no will, advise them there's no will. And so the estate will proceed under the administration of descent and distribution, which are the laws in the Commonwealth of Virginia that govern if you don't have a will. If you're a beneficiary, again, regardless of the relationship you might have had with the fiduciary prior to these designations or these titles, contact them. Let them know where you are. Send them a letter, even if I'd call them first. It seems a bit formal to get a letter sometimes, but call them, say, hi, I'm here. Send a letter, give them your complete name, give them your current address, give them your telephone number, give them the way you want them to communicate with you, if it's by email or by text or by mail or certified mail, however it is. And in that letter, ask that you receive, if it's applicable, presumably it would be, a copy of all the filings that the fiduciary makes with the Commissioner of Accounts.
Sure.
And that way there's communication going both ways. Sometimes we run into a little bit of an issue about beneficiaries or heirs feeling that they didn't get the complete accounting. Sometimes the fiduciaries don't send the backup documentation. They'll send the accounting page, the itemized page, but not the bills or the bank statements. And if it's not a lot, I say send it. The fiduciary can always charge the estate if there's an expense for that.
Good. Well, we talked a little bit about resources that your office, that are available to help an executor. You mentioned, of course, the Virginia State Bar has a great program, a booklet out, and I know your office is available as well to answer questions and help people and make it a little bit easier to get the process moved along. We're running out of time, so I wanted to ask you if you could kind of sum up a couple of key points you want to make in the way of closing comments and advice you might have for folks who are going to be executors in Stafford County?
Sure. And this is sort of before they become executors or fiduciaries. Organization is really a gift you can give whoever you leave behind, family, friends. And so as tough as it is, think about it. You don't have to have a will, but it's a good idea. Tell somebody where the will is. Organize your stuff. And sometimes we don't know we're leaving the planet, so I appreciate the difficulty in that, and I appreciate how busy everybody is every day. But if you can squeeze out some time, make yourself get organized, tell somebody where the will is. If you have a safety deposit box, get them signed on to the safety deposit box. You don't have to give them a key. Tell them where the key is. Mm-hmm. So that makes what happens next, if you're a fiduciary or if you're a beneficiary, pretty straightforward. The other thing I'd suggest is, again, this is before they ever arrive in my office, is sit your family down, talk to them, tell them what you want and what you don't want. That, again, communication really is key, and that's really, I think, a nice thing you can do for your family and your friends.
That's really true. Those are great suggestions. Well, Jeannie, I want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today, for sharing all this great information, and for your continued public service to the Stafford County Circuit Court and the citizens of Stafford County. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. What I take away from our visit with Commissioner of Accounts Jeannie Donk is that if problems arise in the probate of an estate, as they will from time to time, do not hesitate to lean on them for assistance. And if you are having problems with an accounting, which many executors do, you are encouraged to call her office with questions. In short, Jeannie and her staff are easy to work with and very proactive in mentoring executors and bringing folks together to resolve differences so the probate of an estate is administered properly and hopefully closed promptly. They perform a great public service for the Stafford County community, and we are thankful for their commitment in doing so. This brings us to the conclusion of our show. We hope you found it informative. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.